Thank you, Ezio. No, I have to disappoint all of you from the beginning that I will not answer this question. Uh, but I hope to clarify some issues and maybe give some thoughts for the discussion. So thanks, Jim and Massimo, for setting the stage. And with my talk, we're zooming in a little bit on the details of how to monitor technical details. So yeah, I will just briefly go how the monitoring fits into the adaptive management framework, then some general principles of monitoring design and planning, and how to monitor specific components. And I'll give you a practical example from ASF wild boar and hunters complex, let's say, and how the monitoring actually failed to be implemented there so far. So the monitoring can be seen or should be seen as a part of adaptive management framework, which is a process of decision making where we have more conceptual part here, where we plan, identify the problem, identify objectives, and so on, and then we implement our management action, and then possibly adjust our management of a particular problem. And as you can see, the basis of the monitoring should be actually set at the very beginning of this process. So the definition of the problem is answering the question of why we should monitor, the definition of the objective, and definition of the indicators, performance indicators of our management plan is going to define what should we monitor and how. And it's similar to scientific investigation process, which you are all familiar with. So you should think about data collection before you go out into the field and collect the data, so that you can later analyze it properly. So the monitoring here is already too late to think about how should we do it and what should we collect. Yeah, this is maybe a bit repetition to the previous slide, to the previous talk, but let's go quickly through this. So what should wildlife monitoring should be like? It should be reproducible, so we should be able to compare the results or the outcomes of the monitoring from different countries or different regions. It should be consistent in space and time, so that we're sure that the trends we observe are the result of the actual change and not the change in the methods. So the protocols of data collection, storage, analysis, and sharing should be also standardized and documented, again, that we can apply them in some other area. And also, ideally, the wildlife monitoring should be adaptable. So if there is a change in, if there is a new management challenge, if there is a new problem, then we should be able to adjust our monitoring to include the new components, for example. And the effort should be coordinated and affordable, especially if the monitoring is to be applied on a large scale, which inevitably will have some trade-offs with accuracy, because the number of sampling points, for example, will be limited. So we can see the main two categories or main two approaches to monitoring. One, I just called it here for this presentation, a survey approach, which is what is currently mostly being done on a large European scales, where some data is available through, for example, national data collection frameworks such as hunting, harvest data, and so on. So this is an advantage actually, that there is some already data, so we can look historically how the trends look like. The this data is covering large areas, but the system is quite inflexible. So it's basically very hard to introduce or ask for new things to be collected. So the estimates or the actual numbers from this monitoring are very difficult to compare within the countries even, or between the countries, because there are no standardized methods applied, or very often they are, like, for example, density estimates. If some countries are estimating this, they are not really based on any scientific methodology, so the results can be hardly comparable. And also this data collection framework is opportunistic, so it's more data collection than monitoring, actually. So in contrast to the other approach, the sampling approach, where we have a points of sampling. So I show there in the upper right corner, this is the beautiful system of Finland, where they have these triangles 4 by 4 kilometers, and they have thousands of these points where they estimate abundance of various wildlife. And the other example is the European Observatory of Wildlife, where we have a points of camera trapping for density estimates. And so this system is quite adaptable, because we can collect new parameters, and it should have standardized methods. So the method is actually on the same, applied to all the points, resulting in high quality data, but of course it requires quite careful design. I'll come back to that later. And there is some upscaling needed, so some sort of modeling to be able to extrapolate the results onto a large area, for example. But with this approach, we can do targeted monitoring. So actually, targeting some specific questions or objectives within this adaptive monitoring, adaptive management framework. Another challenge is the choice of monitoring units. I mean, if we have the sampling approach, we have obviously the points, but currently the management units or administrative units are the most commonly used for collecting data on within countries, within regions. So these can be municipalities, NATs, and so on, hunting grounds. Another approach could be ecological units, so not based on administrative borders. Of course, wildlife doesn't care about borders too much; they care more about the habitats. But this is rarely implemented. And finally, maybe the gridded approach is a way forward, because this could accommodate both the sampling data coming from the sampling approach and the currently collected data within the national and or regional data collection frameworks. So now let's go into some specific components. So the first, the most coarse kind of data on wildlife is about species occurrence and distributions, and this is usually large scale resolution of data, and relates to species of conservation concern, usually invasive or expanding. So these common species are probably less interesting. So it's this kind of data is collected through opportunistic approach, I would say. So either there are some research points or casual observation, media reports, and so on and so on. And this data is then aggregated, stored at some large organizations as GB, for example. Citizen science is becoming a very powerful way of collecting this type of data, and there are a new relatively low-cost methods emerging, such as non-invasive genetics, eDNA, acoustic sampling. Those could be used for targeted monitoring. So, for example, at the edges of the species range, or in areas where we are not sure about the occurrence or species expanding and so on. Now then we go a little bit one level down into the detail or into the accuracy of our monitoring. So species abundance. This is a part of this sustainability component that Jim was mentioning. So we have there's a bunch of methods for estimating species abundance, and this could be all another talk. Let me just divide them into two groups. So we have the indices of species abundance, either based on the actual animal signs of animals, or actual observations of animals, or based on their impact, such as crop damage, vehicle collisions, and so on. So these indices are used to observe trends over time. Here we have hunting packs and road accidents with wild boar. So you see they are quite well correlated. And the other group is actual estimates of an absolute numbers of the animals, so the density estimate. And so the ENETWILD was collecting a lot of data on the hunting harvest, and has made an effort to convert actually this harvest data from a simple index of abundance into the actual abundance by modeling this harvest density and combining it with the habitat quality of wild boar. However, as nice as this picture look like, it still suffers from the problem of biases that hunting statistics have, such as they are basically driven by political pressures or hunting efforts and so on. For example, when there is an ASF outbreak, I mean, the hunting obviously either goes up or down, whatever. But you see the problem. It's biased due to the hunting efforts, and may not actually reflect the actual changes of population size, and therefore we need some sort of independent estimate, independent of the hunting system, of the animal densities, and the camera traps are becoming a leading tool for the job, and it was also adopted by the ENETWILD, as you know, through the observatory. Of course, as I mentioned, this type of approach, especially when it covers such a large area as Europe, there is a large spatial heterogeneity in the habitats and so on, which can cause a substantial bias in our estimate. So we need to make sure that the proper spatial coverage and habitat representations and so on, and also ecological scales. I mean, this is not a universal tool for all species. For example, carnivores will have, but do have a much higher spatial requirements, so the ranges are huge. And so with one design of camera trapping, it's probably not possible to estimate both carnivores and ungulates at the same time. So we need different approaches depending on the questions, or the species, for example, which use linear habitat structures, rivers, otters, for example. Now we move to this human-wildlife conflict component. So there is a bunch of wildlife impacts, both on economy and ecosystems. such as crop damage, forestry damage, livestock, depredation, health, vehicle collisions. Many of these parameters are collected by national data collection frameworks in the form of how much money was spent for compensation, how many accidents happened, and so on and so on. But this type of data is also quite heterogeneous in Europe. Like some countries don't even collect the data on vehicle collisions. So there is a need for some harmonization here, for sure. And yeah, the conservation or ecological impacts of wildlife, this is highly an unrepresented component of the monitoring. For example, we have a decline, for example, in the wild boar density due to ASF, and how this decline is affecting, for example, forest regeneration. We know that it is happening, or forest composition, so to say, because the wild boar is a seed predator, or how decline in wild boar density is affecting wolf diet, and how this can in turn, for example, wolves depredation on livestock. So there is quite a lot of interactions that could be monitored, or depending, of course, on our objective. But it's a challenge, of course, because you have to choose and monitor several parameters simultaneously. And these wildlife impacts, of course, have quite a big variation in space and times. And time, think of vehicle collisions that are hotspots of this. So we need to really map this out and to understand the risk factors. And to understand them even better, maybe some targeted monitoring. So some specific sites can be chosen to, for example, exclude some areas from browsing or grazing to understand the impact of ungulates on the forest regeneration and so on. And we have a human dimension component, which I agree with Jim is very, very important, because these are the attitudes and perceptions of different groups of people that separate the coexistence with wildlife from conflict with wildlife. Sorry. And so it's really important to monitor this parameter as well, even if we implement some management action that is in theory only relating to wildlife, so that we know that our management actions are actually accepted or not accepted by the general public and by the different stakeholders that are involved in this process. So I'm not a social scientist, so I will not give you an answer how to do it, but obviously there is methods, questionnaires, direct questionnaires, polls, focus groups, and also analysis of social media trends is quite a powerful tool to assess people's attitudes at this moment. And finally, to our practical example, and going back to this adaptive management framework. So we have our problem, which is the control of the African swine fever in wild boar. We're talking only wild boar here, no domestic. And so we can define the objective of minimizing incidence and spread of ASF, and we can come up with some performance indicators. So obviously surveillance of the disease, but also ideally monitoring of the host. And we implement the control measures, culling, fences, whatever. We should do the monitoring and adjust possibly our control strategy according to these performance indicators. Yeah, so as I said, in reality, actually, this ASF control has in the recent years, especially at the beginning, has exposed some strong deficiencies in monitoring of wild boar and wildlife host for this disease. So at the stage of defining what and how should be monitored, and defining our control actions. We are not really able to do this because we didn't have a good baseline data on host abundance, and so it was very hard to actually plan how much more wild boar should we harvest, because we didn't know how much did we have, in fact, and so this was quite difficult, and it is still. And even after the implementation of these control measures, there was a very different responses from the hunters community, who were very often treated as a tool to do the job, and they not very often were willing to perform these tasks. And so there are now several papers looking into actually hunters' response to these measures that were pushed on them from the vet authorities or agricultural authorities. And so this is one part of the component that was of the monitoring that was missing. The other one was actually the monitoring the changes of in the host abundance, in the wild boar abundance. The surveillance of the disease was probably the one thing that was done okay, but it's probably because the disease surveillance is governed by the law, and it's much better regulated than the monitoring of wildlife, which was actually not very well guided. And yeah, so in the end, both my experience and from Poland, and also discussions with colleagues, show that even if we had some experience, some knowledge, and some science-based guidelines for the decision makers in the administrations, this was largely ignored at the process of at this point of readjusting our strategy or defining it. So actually, this circle, when it comes to ASF control, is broken at some point, and so we are not learning from our actions, or at least not until now. Not much. I mean, there is some progress because there are some tools that are that are advised to be applied as the control measures right away after each outbreak, but still, I think we could do much better job in this regard. Okay, and yeah, the last point. There are some points for discussions. We will have during the workshop. We will have some kind of a template, and we will work through this table. But as we could see, the monitoring is quite inconsistent, so we can think about the ways of harmonizing the design. Do we really need the density estimates, or indices are fine? We can think about what sampling unit to choose, which indicators of the impact of wildlife should be preferred, because obviously, as Jim said, I mean, we can't monitor more. We have to monitor everything. We have to choose the most relevant ones. And finally, quite important, the choice of spatial and temporal scales of the monitoring. Okay, thank you.